We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. I'm the host, Derek Lambert. Today, we're talking to a scholar in Islamic literature, if you will, Quran, Dr. Daniel Brubaker. Welcome to MythVision.
Thank you.
I just want people to know, Daniel Brubaker is a postdoctoral researcher, and I got this from your academia website, so I hope you don't mind. Postdoctoral researchers studying early Quran manuscripts as material objects and witnesses to the text and its community in the time of Muhammad and the earliest centuries following his death. Brubaker's doctoral dissertation centered on scribal corrections in Quran manuscripts of the first three, is it Hijri centuries. Mm-hmm. He received his PhD from Rice University in 2014. And for those who are interested, the book we're actually centered on, and it is translated into other languages, is Corrections in Early Quran Manuscripts, 20 Examples, Quran Manuscript Change Studies. So this book, I can't imagine you've always had great positive feedback, especially from the faithful on this particular book. Tends to be that way. If you tell a King James onlyist, for example, there's some problems with his King James Bible, or there could potentially be, that might stir up the pot, if that makes sense. But tell us a little bit about this book, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, thanks. And actually, I've been very pleased with the general feedback on the book across the board. And as you say, there are some. There's the whole range of people, depending on. Even given the many backgrounds that people come from, I have many Muslims who have said very kind things about the book, and then there have been some people, across the board who have been critical of things. There's a kind of a funny thing in the first 2 weeks of having the book published. I've learned as I'm preparing my next book, 2 books for publication, to be very, very careful about small details, because there was a small typo in a footnote near the end of the book that was picked up, and I had corrected it actually before anybody else noticed it, but there were still some out there that were in print. So of course it went around on Twitter, and there's heavy criticism about that. But people will find things to be critical of in any event. So, but the book itself, Derek, is just a very small sampling of sort of the first sampling of the work that I did in my doctoral dissertation, and it's intended for a general readership. You mentioned in our conversation prior to going on air that you had encountered words in it that you didn't understand. I try to explain things like that in the book and make it not too daunting for somebody who may not have a technical background. And so subsequent books that I'll be publishing will be more technical in nature, but I just wanted to give people a taste, because there was a pretty wide interest in the general topic, and I just wanted that to be out and available for discussion.
Thank you so much for that. Also, I noticed you had a website people can go to, and that is the danielbrubaker.com. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your website.
Well, I just wanted to have a place. I found myself, contributing to different, blog posts or to different articles for different publications, and I just, like many, wanted to have a central location where I could put stuff up, and I haven't fully maintained it and used it to its fullest extent. But that's the intention, is to have it be a place where I can put up articles and have sort of an archive of these discussions, as well as other things of interest like photographs and things like that. So I do intend to get back to that in the next couple of months and do a little bit of upgrade and maintenance on it, particularly when it comes to having people be able to just stay in contact, mailing lists and stuff like that. I don't want to barrage people with things, but I do want to be able to touch base with those people who are interested and sign up to be notified of new posts. So yeah, that's just a basic personal website. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, if you're interested, you can go down in the description of the video, check out the information, of course, and get you a copy of the book, so you can take a look at the material as well. My first question, Dr. Brubaker, is what made you get into Quranic manuscripts? I have a story what led me into this and why I'm interested in examining critically Islam or Quran, all of these various things. What is your story?
Well, why wouldn't you want to get into that, right? No, I just when I decided to go into the study of in the area of general Islam, early Islamic history, well, preceding that, I don't know how much you know about me or my background, but I did have an interest in textual criticism when it came to biblical manuscripts and things like that over many years. And so when I started into my PhD in Islam generally, it's in religious studies, I really wanted to sort of touch on something that would be significant. And I know a lot of people try to take a safe route with their doctoral dissertation. In many fields, actually, it's not such untouched ground that they're covering. So sometimes you have no choice but to choose a sort of a obscure little corner topic of things. But if I was going to be doing this, I wanted to do something that was, fairly. Excuse me.
So as soon as we get off that notification, another one.
Yeah, that's right. Excuse me a moment. Not that it will be bothering us anymore for another hour, but anyway.
Right. I don't think it shouldn't take too long.
Yeah. So, well, that's fine. Yeah. But as long as I was doing something, I wanted to make it something that was really touching on some core important questions. And so I became aware of, just the fact that textual criticism was fairly undeveloped with respect to the Quran in my course of my studies. And then through some colleagues, one namely the late Keith Small, who had become a friend, I had seen some pictures of some corrections in a couple of early Quran manuscripts, and that just really captured my attention. And I thought it was surprising to me the extent of these two or three photographs that he showed me. And I just started to wonder how many more things like that there were. And now, obviously, as I think there are scribal corrections in early manuscripts because people are, not robots. They're making mistakes sometimes when they transcribe and things like that. So, but I just thought it was interesting, and I decided to start walking down that road. And as I did so, I found a lot of interesting information that I'm still, really gathering and processing. And there's a lot of work to be done as far as understanding what the meaning is. Some of them certainly are, just corrections of scribal mistakes, but I've found a number of other things along the way that are more than that and more interesting than that, in my opinion.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's the stuff that gets my ears peaked. I want to know those things and get into them. So I suspect since you're still working on this, maybe there's another book in the future that's going to actually delve into further material, huh?
Yeah. Yes. There are quite a number of things in the works, and it's always easier said than done, but the things are in process, and I have one project in process with Brill and a couple of other projects that I haven't decided to place. I had a book proposal approved with Lexington Books last year, but I kind of let that fall to the wayside. You have to sort of pick and choose what you're going to dedicate your time to. But there are things coming forward.
If I may, just so that we get a little more background before we just get a general overview of the Quran history, if you will, from your perspective, because if there's one thing I learned about from scholars is you're not all in agreement. There's a lot of things you take different paths on, and what you guys would agree or not agree, male, female, don't matter. My point is just people that are scholars. So how long have you been looking into Quranic manuscripts?
Well, I'm 7 or 8 years postdoctorate now, and that was 8 years in that, so it must be 15 years or more. Well, the manuscripts, obviously the earlier part of the doctoral work is somewhat more general in studies, but certainly more than a decade. I think my first major research trip where I was actually handling Quran manuscripts and cataloging these things was in 2011. So that's more than 10 years.
Thank you for that. How many manuscripts have you inspected?
Well, a manuscript. Okay, that is
a different question. Yeah,
it's a lot, and it depends on how you what you call a manuscript. Now, a fragment. Most of the things that I've looked at are fragments, and a fragment, however, is not just a single little piece of something. It can be up to several pages, sometimes many pages, as long as it's not the entire book.
Maybe that's a better question to ask. Manuscripts and fragments that are ancient from antiquity.
Yeah, well, I mean, my focus has been on Quran manuscripts of the first several centuries of Islam. And I have probably looked at something like 10,000 now. I've sort of lost count, but it is something like that. And many of those I've seen and handled in person. But yeah, I don't have a running exact tally, but it's on that order.
Pretty big number there.
Yeah.
Where are some of the oldest manuscripts and, if you will, fragments? Where are they kept?
Yeah,
the oldest ones, of course. Like the earliest is.
Thanks to the British for going out and gathering these things from all over the place and conquesting and stuff. There are a lot of things in British libraries. In the British Library, there are some important ones, and in the various universities, Cambridge, Oxford, as we all know, Birmingham. Chester Beatty was an independent, wealthy man who gathered many important manuscripts for the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin. There are many. And outside of the UK, there's the other national libraries. The National Library of France in Paris, there are a lot of very good manuscripts. National Library of Russia in St. Petersburg, many. And then there are some museums in the Middle East, especially the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, Qatar, has a wonderful collection of manuscripts, and I was able to see and photograph all pages of all the manuscripts in my time period several years back as well. Kuwait as well. There are some important collections there, two important collections, one smaller museum and another. Yeah, I mean, I could go on there. There are others in Cairo. Obviously, there are some important manuscripts as well. It's a little bit harder to gain access there, in my experience. There's a very nice little museum called Beit al-Quran in Manama, Bahrain, and yeah, I mean, so those are just a few. But right. And I also went to Tashkent in Uzbekistan, and there's one that said, well, there are a number of Qurans that are claimed to be the Quran of Uthman, and so everybody sort of wants their early Quran to be the Quran of Uthman. But there is one called the Samarkand Quran, which is there in Tashkent. One of the museums has, and I hope I'm not going into too much detail here, but
no.
So there's a museum in Tashkent that has a replica. There was a facsimile edition that was produced of this Tashkent Quran. It's a very large book, and so you can see it. Even the replica is on display behind glass in a case. But then the actual thing itself is in Tashkent as well, and you can go there and look at it in person. It's in a mosque near a Muslim center. So yeah, those are some of the things. I mean, as you can imagine, there's a proliferation of these manuscripts, and I didn't even mention Istanbul, very important, the Topkapi Museum, and also the other Islamic Arts Museum in Istanbul, and many more in Iraq. I understand there are some big caches of Quran manuscripts that I have some connections and linkages to, and fortunately many of those has been, with all the wars and things going on, I'm happy to know that some pains have been taken to preserve some of these objects, which are, have been around for so many thousands of years, more than 1,000 years from destruction. So yeah, I mean, there's more, but that's a start.
It is. Final question in terms of this part of the conversation. How many corrections have you found so far? So your book is saying we found 20 early corrections.
Yeah.
Maybe you can explain what they are. What do you mean by corrections, and how many have you found?
Yeah, the book is not necessarily the earliest or even the most important. It's sort of, I wouldn't say an entirely random sampling, but it's a representative sample. So nothing particularly extra important about these, although one of the manuscripts that I talk about in there is, and the one, in fact, that's pictured on the cover is, I think, one of the more interesting ones. And so I have, I had about 800 corrections that I cataloged, actually, depending on how we define correction, which was the other part of your question. I'll come to that in a second. There could have been more than that, but toward the end of my doctoral dissertation, I decided to exclude one category of that could sort of question marks from the discussion altogether, and I brought those in and mentioned them at the end of my book as well. But what is a correction? So I had about 800 then, and by now there are about there's several thousand, maybe probably more than 4,000. I had some help from 2 research assistants for a while in sort of cataloging the photographs that I was going around and taking as well. So some of those have appeared online, and more will go up soon. There are some transitions that I'm going to talk about in my next video on my channel as well, in terms of some of the online resources that are out there to show these things. But so that gives you a number, somewhere in the several thousands of corrections. So what is a correction? And that's a good question, because the word correction is in some ways kind of a loaded term. Correction implies that something is made more correct by what change has happened on the page. And I don't want to presume that, although generally it is a safe presumption that when you see a change from one thing to another on a manuscript page, that it was thought by the person doing that change that the new text was the more correct text. But maybe a safer way, I think I titled my doctoral dissertation Intentional Changes in Quran Manuscripts, which is maybe a little bit more of a neutral term. Mm-hmm. But what I was really looking at is any place on the page of a Quran manuscript where some post-production alteration occurred. And that could be something that was erased. It'd be something that was added in, with an additional insertion, something that was erased and then written over, things like that. So any sort of after-the-fact intervention on the page.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Have you found this is the bombshell question here. Have you found any hereditary scribal mistakes, meaning mistakes that has been passed down and entered today's Quran? If so, can you tell us what they are?
Yeah, I have been focusing most of my work on cataloging and describing. And, time goes by, and this is one of the things that happens as you get older. I've noticed time is spinning by much more quickly now. And so by now I really should have much more developed there's been some things happening in the past couple of years that have thrown off the rhythm and productivity a bit that I'll be discussing a little bit in coming months, probably. But in terms of hereditary changes or changes that show evidence of some hereditary thing going on, nothing particular springs to mind on that at the moment. Obviously, that's a very important question. When we talk to, and so sort of in dealing with that question, we want to bring up, obviously, reference to textual criticism in terms of the biblical manuscripts, because there's such a much more developed discipline there over a very long time. And so what we're looking at, and in case viewers aren't familiar with what you're asking there, is you're looking at the family trees of manuscripts. So if a manuscript is copied, let's say that they're copied by not through memory or through hearing something read, but rather through looking at one page and then copying it to another page. And so let's say that there is a mistake or a variation that occurs in one manuscript, and that gets copied to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one. And maybe at some future time, somebody comes back and says, no, that's right, and then they go and correct those manuscripts. And that's kind of what you're asking, Derek, right?
It's pretty much, yeah. I mean, is there any... Yeah, I would say that's pretty much it. Have you found any hereditary scribal mistakes, meaning mistakes that have been passed down and have entered today's Quran, though? So, I guess that could be, if we were using an analogy to New Testament criticism, you find people correct things, but sometimes there's this idea in the vein of that where a correction seems to be made by a scribe, and it finds that becomes the standard, this is the interpretation, this is what it actually said. And so we kind of lose what maybe earlier manuscripts had to say about it.
Well, and the sort of textbook example of that in the Bible would be 1 John 5:7, where there was a scribal comment that seems to have been picked up and incorporated into the Latin Vulgate, and then when people prepared, when the King James translation of the Bible was prepared, the translators, rather than going back to the original languages or the earliest manuscripts, which they may or may not have had access to anyway, they went from the Vulgate, and that was incorporated into the King James, and it wasn't part of the original. It's clearly understood that that was not part of the original writing, and so newer translations omit that now. And so the important thing, obviously, would be getting as close as you can to the earliest. And when it comes to the Quran, obviously, and not to skirt your question there, but in answer to that, I just don't, I really don't know there's nothing that I can point to directly at this point in time, but I think it's an open question. But the larger thing that people need to understand is that we don't completely know. Well, I mean, when we talk about the early history of how the Quran came to be, it was within, 656 or so. By then, we had the standardization of Uthman, which is really a campaign of suppression. So there were several early Qurans that were in existence, early mushafs or codices, books of the Quran that were copies in existence at the time. And what they really did is they destroyed, at least according to a tradition, they destroyed the ones that were to be suppressed, and they chose one to become the standard. So I noticed in the prior discussion that I mentioned to you, I watched the conversation that you had with Moran Van Putten, and we're discussing a little bit the Sonnet Palimpsest. What we have evidence of, possibly or probably in that lower level of the palimpsest, is the lower text type, which is at variance to what we have now. The reason I sort of developed that out is that we don't actually know. It could be that there are many of such things that are hereditary transmissions of variants in the Quran today that trace back to the Quran of Uthman, but we don't know that they're variant because we don't have those manuscripts that were destroyed at that time. And it's really kind of a shame that we don't have them for reference to look at and study, but we do have some in the palimpsest, and maybe more will emerge in time. Is that too confusing, or is that
to make it simple? Tell me if I'm on the right track here. There's a kind of a dark age for Quran manuscripts that we just don't know, and so it's very possible. You aren't saying yes or no to the question because we just don't know. But with what we do have, we don't see that like we see with biblical studies. It's much easier. It seems like they standardized it very early on. They did a good job trying to stamp out everything. Of course, we found the palimpsest. We don't really have any other evidence that's really popping up. So we're kind of left in the dark. Isn't that the proper conclusion there at the end of the day?
Yeah. So the nice thing, I mean, you have in biblical studies, you're dealing with something a little bit different. You had, unfortunately, you have more perishable materials. The parchment is much more durable than what's it called? Why is the word escaping me now?
Had a brain fart.
Yeah.
Papyri?
Papyrus, yeah. So papyri degrades, but it's unlikely that it would last over a millennium like the other does. So we have that happening, but you didn't have a widespread destruction of these manuscripts going on, and certainly nothing, to my knowledge, there was just sort of this worldwide campaign to destroy any variants. And so that's just a different situation. And we do have, I suppose you called it a dark age, but yeah, we do have a dark, something obscuring our view into that past time. Now, if you were to look at the way that the history of the Quran has been done, mostly up until now, and there are entire sciences called sciences, around this. There are many works that deal with the development of the different readings and the manuscript tradition, but these are all much later works, sort of telling the past history of what the Quran was. In fact, do you remember what an isnad?
Say that again.
The isnad.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so there's a chain of transmission from it. In absence of you can either look at a manuscript, which is a physical object, or you can look at in Islamic historiography, they rely heavily upon reports, whether it's reports of what Muhammad said or did, or reports of what words were in the Quran, and they would go back to through chains of transmitters who were known to be honest and reliable people, and known to eventually have, way back in the chain, have had the opportunity to hear and memorize what Muhammad said. And so these things are very well developed, and you can fill a shelf with even some of these single works, multi-volume works dealing with these things. And so to many people who are working in Islam, and to many Muslims, it's taken as, that is the authority. If it says, and it lists a chain of reliable people, heard it from them, and they're all reliable, well, of course we know that this is true. But the problem is, and there have been people like Harold Motsky and others who worked with this analysis of the isnads and the traditions, is, as it's not too hard to imagine, and in fact we know that it did occur, somebody saying, well, I need a stronger support for this, so I'm going to find somebody who's known to be reliable and sort of embellish my chain of transmission so that it goes back to the prophet. And is that always a nefarious activity?
It's like the same question Bart Ehrman will ask about, people ask, when Bart Ehrman writes about forgeries, counter forgeries, and things. Is it always nefarious? Well, people frown upon it if they knew you did it, but are you doing it because you're trying to be evil or do that? No. Sometimes you're trying to do it because you. Right.
And there's honor and shame tied up in it, and all these different things. But the fact, when it comes down to it, the most reliable and really the only reliable thing that or the thing that should take precedence over everything else, are the material objects that have survived from that time period. And so I say all that just to emphasize the importance of paying attention to the manuscripts and inscriptions, and that we can date to the time period and coinage and all that stuff. It's just, it is of a different category of evidence than the reports that were distilled to writing maybe 150, 200 years later. It's important to have those things and to reference them, but it's not the same as having an object that dates back to the time.
So, all right, my final question is actually kind of a rabbit trail of a discussion here. And it's more about having you paint a picture for us in your research of early Islam. Maybe it wasn't even called that at the time. Okay. We're dealing with the Quran and the early movements right there with Muhammad out the gate. We don't have that Quran. We have Uthman, which is, coming after. He's trying to compile and standardize this text, which we have palimpsest material to kind of show, like the lower palimpsest material that's like, hey, there's something before this, and they're writing over it. They're if you will, writing the version that they want, the standardized version that Uthman's trying to say. What is and this is speculation land, so I want anyone who's watching, please do not attack.
Yeah, right.
This is all speculation here, but maybe you have good reasoning. I'd like to hear your thinking. What happened that you think on the development of the Quran? Do you think Muhammad actually started developing some of this in his own life, and that it ends up taking its own course as they politically are moving into a new period and they're starting to rule areas, things like that? What are your thoughts about how the Quran came to be up to Uthman?
Yeah,
I mean, remember, you're all about the manuscript having the hard evidence, and so this is a because even their tradition doesn't agree. Oh, they found it on leaves, and they found it written on stones, and they found it on they found it in memory of soldiers that were dying. Stop killing them off. Let's get the Quran written down. Things like that. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I want to come around to that in a moment, but if you think of what it is like to write that history of the earliest biography of Muhammad was about 150 years or so after his death. This U.S. Civil War was about 150 years ago, right? So imagine you were writing a history of the Civil War, and you had no written documents. You had people's memories from their grandparents and great-grandparents and whatever, but you had no written documents until that time telling about the events. That's kind of what we're talking about when we're hearing even about Uthman's campaign.
Oh, wow.
We have evidence. And so when we're looking back at those early manuscripts and talking about an Uthmanic text type or an Uthmanic tradition, we are taking that report, that historical report, and sort of testing it and seeing if the manuscripts after that point are consistent with that sort of scenario. And so what happened before that? Well, one of the interesting things about the manuscripts, the early Quran manuscripts, those that have been radiocarbon dated, is a number of them have been dated to before the time that the Quran was supposed to have first been written down, and in many cases have been dated to before the end date of the 95% probability date range of the radiocarbon dating is, in one case that I know of, 2 years before Muhammad was supposed to have been born in 570 AD. So you've got these sort of unusual things going on. Does that mean that I think that the Quran was written before Muhammad was born? I don't think that really makes sense. You can imagine parchment being held for a long period of time before it gets written on, but really, okay, let's say that Muhammad's life was substantially like it is reported and traditionally conveyed. Mm-hmm. And then it got written,
which is highly suspect to begin with. But
yeah, I mean, I don't even. There's so much to think about and look at, and there are conflicts within the Muslim sources about many different things. It's well known that there are disagreements in the Hadith about different things. So,
okay,
leading to the need to classify as strong and weak, and different people as dishonest and reliable, or having poor memories and good memories, and things like that. So this is not controversial stuff, but let's assume that Muhammad did it, lived, that he was a prophet, or that he encountered an angel, which obviously that's Muslims believe that he was a prophet, and that's what makes somebody a Muslim. And so, but that he did have these revelations, and they got heard by people. He recited them over the period of his lifetime in his ministry, and people wrote them down, palms, sticks, and whatever. And then they got eventually gathered and compiled into a book. I don't know. I mean, when you come to the point of Uthman, that's not a very long period, but we seem to have, but we did have apparently multiple different mushafs that had some variations in them, and some of them are reported in the traditional material as well.
Right.
And so what precipitated Uthman? So the traditional account is that some of the people who were the Qurra, the ones who had heard firsthand and had memorized it, started to die off, and so they had to preserve it into writing. But then also that there were disagreements of people as to the recitation of the Quran, and there was this now a perceived need to create a standard account, that's the sort of pretext for what Uthman did. I think it's reasonable. I just, the thing that bothers me is why destroy, number one, why would you destroy the others. I guess it kind of makes sense. But then also, why would you choose the one that you did? By many accounts, that of one of the companions, one of the early companions was to be Ibn Masud, was the one that would have been the most reliable. He was said by Muhammad himself to be the most reliable transmitter. So, why didn't they choose that one? Instead, his was destroyed. And so it's just this big question mark. Now, is that how much of that is happened? I don't know. What would be the reason for fabricating stories like that? I don't know. These are all good things to think about. But
makes me think like I look at New Testament studies. We have a little bit better, in some respects, it seems, data on trying to figure out like what was going on. And I have a more of a natural approach to everything, so I don't believe in what's being said. So I'm looking at this, and I don't have that faith bubble kind of protecting me, if you will. Mm-hmm. I think there's problems going on between Paul and James and Peter, and I'm pointing out what I think are some evidences of this going on. And I kind of wonder if early on we know about them recording civil wars and all this crap going on. And here you go with political potential agendas. And I can't even imagine what we don't know, even when they recorded clear problems in their own tradition. So imagine what isn't being recorded. And this is something I brought up in the last episode with Shoemaker. I was reading in the biography of Muhammad, I believe it was someone, I can't remember the name, I can't remember his name, but he was a companion of the prophet who said something about the person reporting something that he was like, these are things I couldn't believe. So they were removed, or like, I can't accept this. This is just beyond what I'm willing to accept about the prophet. And that's also like what maybe some people believe about Jesus or whatever their figure might be. It's like, can't accept that. Not going to keep it. Who knows? It's a lot of question marks is the point.
Yeah. And when it comes to the, the preeminent collection of hadith is that of al-Bukhari, and he narrowed the existing hadith down from 600,000 to about 6,000. He kept about 1% of them. And presumably that was based upon his judgment. Now, was his judgment inspired by God? Even assuming that the Quran itself is revelation from God, which I don't presume. Mm-hmm. But if that were the case, then does that revelation now go forward to, because many of the things relating to Islamic practice and law rest upon what is in Bukhari. So did he have a revelation from God as to which ones were correct and which ones are not correct? Or was it merely like, I can't believe that, so this must not be true, and I can believe that, so this one must be true?
Yeah, there's so many interesting questions to ask. Final question, actually. I told you I was going to say this was my last one, but
okay,
one came to mind.
As long as you want.
Yeah. I got one more for you. Are there any, sometimes scholars do work, they come up with particular arguments, and then over time they realize, man, I think that I don't agree with that earlier thing of mine. Are there any of these mistakes that you have found that you would actually retract and say, you know what, I don't think that's a mistake anymore. I think this is something other than that. I would put it in a different category or something. I don't know.
Well, I've been pretty cautious about coming to conclusions in any event. So I don't have too many things like that because I haven't made any sweeping, sensational pronouncements about too many things in the first place. As time goes on, however, and you look at more and more of these things, as with anything, I mean, your ability to discern and, I suppose there were things early on that I might have looked at, and probably the biggest example is these big corrections that cover entire lines or one or two lines of text. to somebody who's looking at it for the first time, that usually looks like, oh, this is really a big deal. It's a big thing. But in a number of those cases, and maybe even most of them, I haven't looked at the ratio, but often when you get a big long change like that, it's something that's caused by an I skip. Maybe something's repeated in a verse that causes them to write the same thing twice, and then to have to erase it later. So it looks very dramatic. And so maybe in my early judgment, I would have thought, oh, this is kind of a big deal, but I don't think I even published something like that. In fact, sort of an interesting thing when I was defending my dissertation to my committee, and Andrew Rippon was on that committee as well. And I remember Andrew Rippon and Paula Sanders were pressing me, kind of. They wanted me to go there. In fact, I remember them using the words to go there to draw more conclusions. I was more cautious than. I just think it's important to be cautious on these things and not overstep. And as somebody from not only who's not a Muslim, but somebody who's a Christian, I just want to be very careful not to allow my own preferences or biases to come in and cause more strong conclusions that are maybe not warranted. Because I just think we should be looking for what's true. There's stuff out there and what's true that you don't need to embellish these things.
Yeah, I think it's honorary to try and believe as many true things as you can, and to try and do that is the best. I think that's the best option. I didn't want to get lost into this, but I was going to ask you, there was this issue that went on. I know Haitham Sidki wrote like a response to your book, and then you wrote a response back to him. Would you like to comment on it at least and tell me what at the end of the day, huh? Oh, sure. Yeah. No, if you don't mind. No, I'm friends with everybody. I don't try to create problems, but I know that he had difficulty or issue with your work, and then you responded back to him, and there was all of this back and forth, if you will, in the academic world. Would you be interested in commenting on that, and maybe what you wish you would be able to convey? I don't know. Give yourself a chance to respond to the criticisms.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because these things play out in sort of in a public arena, but Haitham had been he had been an acquaintance by that point. And interestingly, before his review came out, he was in our home with us for dinner, and he was in this library with me, and we're chatting, and he kind of pulled me aside and said, "This review is coming out." I said, "Don't worry about it. I'm sure you did it fairly, and there were fair criticism and things like that." And then, eventually the review came out, and I read it. And unfortunately, some of the things in the review, I think were not. Yeah, I don't think it was malicious or anything. I don't want to presume motives, but it was just things that were represented that I had said. When somebody will say, set up a straw man and say, he said that I said things that in a particular way, and then criticized them, but it wasn't what I had said in the first place. So that sort of thing was without, I don't have the ability to get into all the technical details of it here, but there were a couple things like that in it which needed to have an answer, and so I did put up an answer. I contacted the journal out of University of Chicago, and his review was 15 pages in the journal, which is really unprecedented for a book review, particularly one that's a little popular level book like that. But they didn't, publish responses to book reviews, and so that was fine. So I just wound up putting it up on my website. So if people want to go look at it, they can find it on academia.edu and read it. And then just more recently, hold on a second here. This isn't a direct response to Haitham, but it's a little bit more dealing with the general issues, and it's in this journal Bibliotheca Orientalis. And so I have an article in that was kind of addressing some of those things. So yeah, like you said, people can disagree on stuff, and scholars disagree all the time on things. And
right,
even Ryan that you had on. Recently, we've had many discussions, and he's a super smart guy, really, really brilliant guy, actually, and I agree with him on almost everything. But you know, there are always going to be these little points that you maybe read the data differently, and then you have a discussion back and forth, and you know, that's just what we do. But hopefully, those discussions are respectful and fair, and you know, if you do that, then you're going to be fine.
Thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for going into these things. You know, I feel like I'm going to hit a wall soon in terms of trying to get at the bottom of these, which is it's just an interesting study.
Yeah.
You know, I like to think that they standardized it early because, well, maybe they learned an example from the Jews and the Christians as well, because they probably saw the problems there. I don't know. It makes me kind of wonder, you know, how over time they picked up a few tricks from their neighbors, and makes me kind of think, okay, well, because we do see some interesting Judaism, Christianity finds its way into this literature, at least key components of both of these religions.
Yeah, and extra, you know, later traditions and things like that. And one of the really interesting things, not to prolong the conversation, but you know, early on in the Quran itself gives a certain credence and authority to what it calls the Torah and Injil, the usually translated Torah and Gospel, but you know, basically it doesn't find fault with the Christian scriptures or the Jewish scriptures. It does not find fault. In fact, it validates them. And you know, even though it was a while before you had the binding of the Christian Bible, for example, into a single book like the Codex Sinaiticus, that was still long in the past by the time Muhammad was teaching. So what was he giving authority and credence to? He was giving it to what was accepted, you know, at the time as the scriptures, the Old Testament, New Testament. So I think over time, and this is probably mostly a different discussion, there arose more of a need to sort of discount those scriptures. But it's just this sort of really weird situation where you have to discount them, but your prophet has validated them. And so then what do you do? And then there's all the stuff, you know, about the where did these sort of, well, I mean, certainly from a biblical perspective, these views of Jesus and the prophets that don't bear resemblance to what we find in the Bible, where did those come from? Because the Quran does have, you know, has these very, you know, you wouldn't recognize these as the same people if you look at the prophets as they appear in the Quran versus how they appear in the Bible. You would think, oh, that's a completely different person with the same name, like two people named John today. You know, they may not be the same person. So
yeah, it makes me want to read Fred Donner's work as well. I'm looking into getting him on. Hopefully I can get a hold of him, where he thinks that this is a monotheistic umbrella type religion at the beginning, or at least an established
the believers, right? Yeah.
Right, the believers. And I have not read it yet, but I know enough about it. I'm excited about this kind of stuff because we're trying to figure out, you know, what it looked like early on. And you have some really interesting points about that, like wondering, why is it Ishmael? Why do they have Abraham actually doing this with Ishmael, not Isaac? Well, obviously to give themselves pedigree, but also what are they doing with the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible? A lot of modern Muslims that have come across will say stuff like, they're all corrupt. There was one that wasn't, but the ones we have today are corrupt. And I'm like, where are they? Where is that non-corrupted version, my friend? You know, like it's a house of cards situation, in my opinion, that they're setting up because they're doing apologetics here, and they're trying to downplay, but their mother is Judaism. So there's like I don't know how to put it. It's kind of like cutting the tree branch that you're sitting on, in my opinion. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and not to there's this field of study, and once you start, as you've now begun, you're going to find sort of rabbit trails everywhere. But you may have have you heard of Christoph Luxemburg's? Okay, so he wrote the Syro-Aramaic. Right.
I think I do have that, actually. I do have that.
Yeah. So anyway, but without going into the technical details, what he, and I believe he was following the tradition of Günter Lühling, who earlier wrote his doctoral dissertation, and it's an incredible work, tracing connections with Christian hymns to the Quran, and some of the, obviously, so Syriac, Hebrew, and Arabic are sister languages, and there's a lot of, even if you look at, there's so many similarities there. So what he does is he traces some things, and given the ambiguities of the way Arabic was at first written, he tries to act as your you mentioned earlier your Scooby-Doo investigator kind of thing. He tries to do that. Exactly. Not so much. Well, I guess maybe pull the mask off, but to actually go and try to see if you can make heads or tails of what we're just talking about with some of these changes. Maybe not changes, but the differences, for example, in the way the prophets are portrayed. Maybe that's due to a word being taken from a Syriac word that comes in and gets pointed differently in Arabic, or understood to be something different, or whatever. It's more than we can do here, but there's all this. Yeah. There's this whole world of stuff that somebody can go in, that people can go and look into and begin to investigate. Sorry about my email there. Just
all right. I feel like it's talking. It wants to talk with us.
That's right. I know. But we tried, so that viewers know, we tried many times to figure out how to turn that off before we did this video.
We did.
I tried. Yeah.
I really do appreciate your time. I hope everybody goes and takes the time to check out your website. You can go there. There's some pictures, of course. There's a lot more there. He's written articles on academia you can go check out. If you're interested in seeing his response to what Dr. Haitham Sidki had responded to critically, I say that for those who are into the critical scholarship, you can go there and check that out. The book is here. If you're interested in checking out 20 examples, corrections, or if you will, changes might be better. I don't know. It's just either way you want to put it. Go check out the book. If you're wanting to get into this, take a deep dive. I know that Dr. Van Putten also wrote a little blurb, I guess you call that, a blurb. With great enthusiasm, Brubaker introduces the fascinating field of Quranic text criticism to a general audience while never losing sight of the academic rigor required for such. No one has documented more corrections in Quran manuscripts than Dr. Brubaker. Worth reading. And I don't think you can get a better, linguist to kind of say, hey, thumbs up, go check it out. So any final words to my audience?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's great to talk, and I'll be happy to talk again in the future, but appreciate it and appreciate the interest.
Thank you, and I look forward to seeing maybe some of the stuff you produce, especially if there's some shocking material. Sean Anthony told me he's like, I haven't found that smoking gun of like, whoa, like we would find in biblical manuscripts. You might find something like that. That's really cool. The endings of Mark, right? Those are interesting things to get into, or stuff like that. That there's nothing he said he's found that's like, whoa, where you would compare it to biblical, but maybe you will. And if you do,
well, I will say this, and you asked if there were hereditary changes. It isn't really relating to that, but there is a there's a later manuscript that deviates with word order and a number of different ways, and it is the one that is pictured on the cover of the book. Okay. And so my next book is an edition of that manuscript fragment. It is, I wouldn't say similar to the Sonnet Palimpsest, but it is variant to a much greater degree than any other manuscript that I've looked at. So that's kind of an aha sort of thing.